Chances are, even if you're under the age of 50, you recognize films like this.
Yoo-hoo!
Jenny thinks that she has the key to popularity, parking in cars with the boys at night.
This is a mental hygiene film, also known as a social guidance film. For nearly 30 years, these films dominated American classrooms, instructing students on things like dining, fashion, manners, and grooming. And while they can be fun to laugh at now, their history is checkered with connections to corporate product placement and even the world of Nazi Germany.
Nothing like being Miss Popularity.
Yeah.
And by the way, how are things going in school?
I guess I don't know much about it.
Social guidance films first arrived in American schools in the late 1940s during the post-war boom. After so many years of war, people were looking for ways to build a better world. One of these people was David A. Smart, a former ad salesman and the future co-founder of Esquire magazine. During World War II, he had seen firsthand how film could be used to influence and sway entire generations of people. Germany's Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, was a master of manipulation who used the media to twist information to proliferate anti-Semitic views and demonize those who dared to speak out against the Nazi Party. As a former marketing specialist, Smart was in awe of Goebbels' use of pro-Nazi posters, pamphlets, and films to sway the German people. When Smart returned to the States, he began to wonder if similar tactics could be used in America in an effort to create a post-war society that would never tolerate another Hitler. Once home, Smart shifted his small company, Cornet Films, from creating military training videos to social guidance films. From 1947 to 1957, Smart's films focused on showing life not as it was, but as it could be. Generally less than 15 minutes long, a typical Cornet film starred a teenage boy or girl facing some sort of typical day crisis. Perhaps it was the fear of being an outsider, or the damaging effects of gossip, or even the dreaded do's and don'ts of a first date. Regardless of the topic, the most important thing was that the characters be two-dimensional and presented as an everyman or every woman who the audience could relate to, or better yet, see themselves in. Smart cast mostly neighborhood children, increasing the chance that students would see themselves in the stories versus a celebrity. Even the cinematography was purposely filmed in a way so that it did not detract from the story. Most were single-camera shoots with full shots and a few close-ups to change up the editing and keep audiences awake. Occasionally, films broke the fourth wall and presented the protagonist with a role of asking the audience what they would do if they were in such a situation, which left stories open-ended and ready for classroom discussion post-film. While this setup doesn't seem like a recipe for success, Smart's films took off. It's estimated that Cornet made over 1,000 films during the height of their popularity. It wasn't long before other educational groups like the Centron Corporation, Encyclopedia Britannica, and the McGraw-Hill Book Company quickly began to pump out their own educational films. As demand grew, corporations such as Disney began to take notice, and they too saw the potential of a captive audience. Which is where Smart's vision of using Goebbels' playbook for good began to blur. One can easily look at Smart's films as having their heart in the right place, albeit one that today comes off as quite bigoted. Almost none of these films acknowledge the lives of Black, Latino, or Asian American citizens, and if the LGBT community is recognized at all, it is presented as an illness and something to shun. Unfortunately, it was just a matter of time before more voices used this platform to return to controlling people's political or consumer views. To understand why the films begin to take this turn, you need only to look closer at the post-war era leading up to the Watergate scandal. The country was undergoing numerous changes thanks to the civil rights and women's rights movement. Unions were the norm, many of America's social programs like Social Security and Medicare were created, and a more permissive youth counterculture was worrying those in power. It's at this point that social guidance films left the mental hygiene aspect of grooming or dating behind as producers began to push ideas like towing the line to fit in, the blessings of capitalism, and anti-union or anti-socialism themes. In the 1948 film What is Business?, the narrator rhetorically asked the audience,
Just think what it would mean if all this were taken away and we were suddenly required to produce our own food, make our own clothes, build our own homes.
Only to immediately answer it with hyperbole.
It would mean living like this.
Likewise, the 1950 film How to Lose What We Have attempts to dissuade union participation by warning of the dangers of too much freedom.
What price freedom? You talk about full security, full employment. Why, you can have that in a penitentiary.
This is also when product placement from corporations begins to take over. We see this in the 1956 film Mr. Be Natural, which was created by a company that sold instruments in the hope of selling students on the idea that joining band and buying their instruments would make you popular. When these films didn't work, which of course they did not, studios leaned even harder into the manipulative techniques that we see in Nazi propaganda. Scare films became the new norm in the 1960s. The Highway Safety Foundation actually paid for film crews to ride along with ambulances to crash scenes and film actual fatalities to use in their films. Likewise, films that addressed substance abuse often presented terrifying over-the-top ideas regarding the effects of drugs to the point of unintended comedy. Drug-themed films almost always presented users as either being weak-minded or someone who thought it would be okay to smoke some weed with friends only to find themselves on a terrible spiral towards heroin use or becoming a casualty of bad acid. This was the death knell for social guidance films. As they became less about offering students a rosy idyllic life to aim for and more about screaming the dangers of the world towards their audiences, they fell further and further back into the dark propaganda trappings that had first given birth to them. In total, it's estimated that roughly 3,000 films were produced from 1945 to 1970, playing in thousands of schools across the country. And while these films missed a large demographic of American students by ignoring everyone except white suburban America, they still made quite an impact on our society. Their most visible influences appear in parody on things like Saturday Night Live, Mystery Science Theater, and others. However, their lessons continue to resonate with people today as we see many parrot their outdated ideas. While at the time, people like David Smart had hoped to help America avoid ever tolerating someone like Hitler by using his propaganda tricks against him, the irony is that much of what he and his contemporaries created opened a channel for others to continue intolerance, manipulation, and the fear-mongering that he wished to escape. So while doing research into these mental hygiene films, I found myself really amazed by the strange behind-the-scenes stories. A lot of them are actually showing up in this book by Ken Smith called Mental Hygiene Classroom Films 1945 to 1970. My favorite by far is the story of Richard Wayman. Now, Richard Wayman was a lawyer from Cleveland, Ohio, who was responsible for many of those highway safety films I was telling you about, the ones with unfortunately dead people. Apparently, he had lost a friend in a car accident, and it was determined that this was never going to happen to anybody else, so he was at least going to try to put his best foot forward and have that not happen. But what he did was get himself a scanner and chase down the local police to the accidents and take photos of the victims without any permission. He would take the pictures and put them into a presentation that he handed out to the state trooper posts throughout Ohio. Mind you, none of these state trooper posts actually asked for any of this help. Later, he got himself a camera and began to make actual safety films, which is fine, except for, again, he was using real dead people. So this story gets even weirder. Apparently, he was giving kickbacks to ambulance drivers to take him to the goriest places he could find, and then, on top of that, rumors started to arise that the company was making porn on the side. Shortly after that, his former mistress ended up dead in her own bed under mysterious circumstances, and wouldn't you know it, around that time, he decided, I'm leaving Ohio and I'm going to sunny California, where he became Sammy Davis Jr.'s business manager. You can't make this stuff up. What you can do, however, is click subscribe, click the bell, make sure that you share this with friends, and if you enjoyed this, I hope to see you back here next month with a new story.